So it's been a little while since Classic came out, and as some of you who watch my videos regularly may know, I fell quite far behind quite early on due to real world things, and as a result, in order to catch up, I realised that it would probably be beneficial if I had my hands on quite a lot of gold, so then I could get my mount nice and early and pay for services, for boosts when I wanted particular pieces of gear and things like that. And as a result, I decided to start doing some flips in order to make a bit of gold to make this process a little bit easier for myself, and then it dawned on me that this might actually be some useful information for any of you guys watching, so I thought I'd bring out this video going over what flipping is, the different types of flips, and how you can use TSM to greatly improve your quality of life when performing these flipping activities to make gold. So let's dive in. Now, straight off the bat, the first thing to talk about is what is flipping. Now, flipping is essentially purchasing an item on the auction house with a view to selling it for more at a later date. Now, there are quite a few types of flipping, but this is not to be confused with shuffles. Now, shuffles are something else entirely, and something that if people want, I will also bring a video out on. But today we will be focusing purely on flipping. So this is purchasing any item that we can get on the auction house that is going to be able for us to collect it, pay all associated fees and cuts to the auction house, and still make a profit by posting it back up and reselling it. This is a highly effective way of making gold, because while a lot of the times the percentage profit margins that you're making on these items are quite nominal and the overall fees that you're making may not seem like big amounts of gold, because the time invested is so little, in fact you can essentially automate this process, you can make a reasonable income back at relatively low levels without having to go out into the world and kill things, so there is no barrier to entry by level. And you can do this in such a time efficient manner that you can make incredible gold per hour. This is how people get incredibly rich in the game, and it's something that you may want to look into, which is why we brought this guide out for you today. Now, this guide is going to go over the basics and the principles, as opposed to going over the really detailed, intricate things that can go a long way to making your profits increase dramatically. That will be coming in a later video. Before we can get to that, however, we need to make sure that people understand the principles behind flipping. And one of the things that a lot of people often don't really understand is the different types of flips, because there is a bit more into it than what a lot of people think. People think it's incredibly basic, you're just going to buy something and you're going to repost it. Now that is one type of flip, but I like to break flipping down into 3 different categories, and I'm going to go over each of them with you now, starting with the aforementioned basic flip. Now, the basic flip is what most people think of when they think of flipping auction house items, and it is as simple as you purchase an item when it is being put up for less than what it should have been, and then you repost for a higher value. Now, this is the simplest and most basic form of flip to understand, and therefore it's great as an entry level way of getting into flipping to make gold. And the example I'm using here is actually the one that I was able to record for you just before I started making this video. You'll have seen it in the introduction to this video. And I was able to get a pair of the Shaman set braces from the dungeons and purchase them for roughly 70% of market value, and then I reposted at 100%. Now, in absolute numbers, this is going to turn about a 2 gold profit, which is decent enough, especially when you consider the fact that the whole process took me about 30 seconds. Now, the issues with this type of flip is essentially just that in order to be able to do this flip, you need to get lucky and find items that are being put up cheaply, that you have the money to be able to purchase, and that you are going to be able to resell because there is a demand for that item. Now, this is relatively simple, but like I say, it can be difficult to find these. You will want to set up your groups that we'll be discussing later, and the appropriate ways of scanning the auction house to find these bargains, as well as you will need to have potentially a relatively large amount of gold depending on the item to be able to purchase it in the first place, and enough gold that you'll be able to play the game without that gold available to you before it gets liquidated again from the item value back in the form of a sale. Now, I have had a lot of success with this so far in WoW Classic. At time of recording, I set up a group for purchasing all of the BOE items from the sets for the different classes that drop in the dungeons. And while these aren't always the best sets available to people, a lot of people, when they first hit max level or are approaching max level, because these items start at the low 50s, will think it's a pretty good starting point before going to gather gear to get their pre-raid best in slot, so they'll just buy it just to equip it. Because the prices are low, it can be quite an impulse buy on a lot of people's parts, which means that often they're not even looking at the value, so then you can get that extra little bit out of them and you don't have to worry about waiting on these items to sell for an extended period of time. They tend to be quite good shifters. That being said, you can do this with many other items. I know a lot of people like to do it with the BOE purples and other pre-raid best in slot items. The only reason I haven't extended myself to that yet is because, like I said, I am currently behind and need to get that gold up front to be able to make these purchases. And of course, you are always running a risk whenever you are flipping an item. If you don't get that sale, or if you misunderstand and pay a little bit extra to begin with, you won't get the same value out of your flip that you may do, and that means that you could potentially lose some or all of the gold you invested originally, which is not something I'm able to do at the price of those BOE purples currently. Now, our next flip type is what I refer to as a cyclical flip. Now, just so you understand this, when I say cyclical flip, I do mean that this is essentially something that becomes available to you at a frequent basis, and it follows around in a particular pattern of an item's value, be that on a daily basis or a weekly basis or even a monthly basis, depending on the item and what things affect the price. The example I have given you on screen here is just for a Flask of the Titans, a raid consumable. Now, this often fluctuates both on a daily and weekly basis. So you can purchase this item, let's say for example at midday, where there aren't a great many people raiding, not many people doing any high level dungeons, and essentially the price, due to low demand, will be lower. The examples I've given on screen were just ones that I saw throughout the day when I was doing my research for this, and I found that at midday and in early morning, I was playing at about 3 AM, the price of a Flask of Titans was about half its market value. But when I checked, I think it was about 6:45, so sort of prime raid timing, then I was able to see them on the auction house at 130% of market value. So this flip is quite simple. If you find yourself at the auction house and it is a time of day where you think these prices might be lower, then of course have a look, purchase them midday price at that 50% market value, wait a few hours and repost at 130%. This tends to be a lot less risky than the basic flip on high value items that we discussed before, simply because of the fact that this is cyclical. You can be assured in the fact that this happened yesterday and the day before and the day before that means there's a very good chance it's going to happen that day and the next day and the day after that. Now, of course, you can branch this further out, so instead of being on a 24-hour cycle for the different raid times, you can also look at popular raid days. So these may not be as popular on, let's say, a Friday night, when hardcore guilds will raid on Tuesdays or Wednesdays on reset, depending on your region, or on Saturdays when people have the time. But that is, of course, somewhat more dependent on the guilds that are on your server that are active, whereas the time of day for these prices does tend to have much more of a steady influence. One of the biggest distinctions between these two types of flips is, of course, the types of items that you're going to be selling. Generally speaking, your basic flips, you're probably going to be selling things in small volume at a higher value, whereas on a cyclical flip, you're probably going to be looking at things like consumables, where you're probably wanting to shift a higher quantity at a lower value. So do bear that in mind when you're deciding what items you want to look for to operate on any type of flip. Now, our final flip type is what I refer to as a progressional event flip. Now, I appreciate that that is a little bit wordy and not exactly the most catchy name that there's ever been given. If someone wants to rename it for me in the comments below, I'll be very happy to take a look at that. But what I mean by this is that essentially, from time to time, the shift in a value of an item can be dictated by something that has happened in game. For example, at the time of recording, we've just had a blue post announcing that on the week commencing the 10th of December, Battlegrounds are going to be released into WoW Classic. Now, the example that I've put up on the screen for you here is for an incredibly popular twink item that I expect is going to have a dramatic increase in its market value once twinking becomes more popular with the release of Battlegrounds. So, progressional events are things that happen in-game, such as the release of Battlegrounds, the release of a new dungeon or raid, something like that, that are going to have a lasting effect on the value of an item. Now, the thing that you do need to realise, however, with this type of flip is that you are essentially predicting the future. Sometimes it's relatively safe. For example, the value of twink items is almost certainly going to increase when Battlegrounds are released because it essentially brings that market into the game. But sometimes if you are predicting an increase in item value with, let's say, a new raid for a consumable you think people are going to need, and then it turns out that it's undertuned and they don't need it, you can potentially lose a lot of money on this type of flip if you get it wrong. So this is certainly one of the more risky types of flips and something that you're going to want to do your research on and potentially have lower investment in than others if you aren't as confident. Now, like I said, the example I put up on the screen for you, I'm fairly confident in. The Shadowfang in my realm is currently selling for about 200 gold. I would not be surprised to see it sell for over 500 easily. But do bear in mind that this may not be the case. I may have got this entirely wrong, and it could just happen as easily to you with the release of the Battlegrounds for something you think is going to sell, or another transitional event in the game that you think is going to potentially give you this flip opportunity. So just bear that in mind. And next we're going to talk about a few of the golden rules of flipping. Now, these golden rules are just basically a bit of common sense combined with some past experience to make sure that you don't repeat the mistakes that I've made in the past and that I've seen many other people make in the past too. It's not going to be a lengthy segment because they're pretty simple and they only really boil down to two basic rules that both pertain to the purchase of items. First of all, do not leave yourself bankrupt. If you have 100 gold on your character, do not invest 100 gold in flips. That is very risky, and if it goes wrong, you are going to lose all of your money, and also in the meantime you're not going to have anything left to invest in anything else, or even, let's say, post auctions or simply play the game. You do not want to invest everything and leave yourself penniless, because that is just a bad idea both in game and in life in general. Secondly, when it comes to purchasing, it's going to seem really obvious, but people do make this error, and that is only buy things when they are cheap. If you see an item that you think you can make money on, but you're looking at a very narrow profit margin because the item is only at 98% of market value, that's not necessarily a good purchase. If you think that market value could go up, then maybe, but it makes it riskier. Even if you purchase a somewhat iffy item, but you get it for 30% of market value, chances are you're going to be able to make a decent profit on it. Now, this is one of the frustrations for people because quite often it's hard to find cheap items, but believe me, it's better to wait and be patient than it is to waste all of your gold purchasing something that's quite expensive and essentially break even or make a narrow loss after all of your frustration. So be patient, invest wisely, and do not spend all of your money. And now that we've been over the basics, we can look at how TSM, that's Trade Skill Master, can help you make this process much simpler and more automated for you. Now, there are a few things that we're going to discuss here, but first off we're going to talk about groups. Now this is because TSM is essentially going to do different activities on a group of items that after you have created the group itself. Now, groupings of items are actually an incredibly simple concept. Essentially all you're going to do is you're going to give TSM the information on a group of items by putting these items and associating them together in a group that you have created. Now, in the example that I'm doing for you here, I was curious as to the potential for purchasing cheap future twink items for when Battlegrounds release, and I discovered an amazing tool, and that is why you see me on Wowhead here. So this tool enables me to create groups of items for Tradeskillmaster Master that I don't actually have in my bag. Ordinarily, when you open Tradeskillmaster Master in game and you go to create a group, it will ask you to fill that group with items from your inventory. Now, I don't have every item in my bag that I am looking to add into this group, so I'm going to use the TSM Group Creator feature on their website. Now, this is absolutely fantastic, and what you're going to want to do in order to create your groups is simply go onto Wowhead, go into the database, filter your results based on what it is that you want to find. So for example, here you see me looking for blue weapons with a maximum level of level 19 that are bind and equip, so that I know I'll be able to get them on the auction house. And all I do is I simply highlight the items, copy them, paste them into Group Maker on the official Tradeskillmaster Master website, and from there I just get an import string from the website in its output box, copy that and take it in game. Now, once in game, you go onto the Import Export tab on your Tradeskillmaster Master. You then go and select the group you wish to import them to from the left hand side, paste your results into the box, click import, and you are done. At this point then, I have a group made that contains all of the items I am interested in buying, and all that remains is to set up the automation of purchases for these items based off of market value. So that's what we're going to do now. Now, when it comes to your group and the automations of activities you want to perform on said group, all you're going to need to do is assign some new operations to that group. Now, operations are how Tradeskillmaster Master utilizes its automation for the items you have in groupings to be able to perform basic activities on them. Now, it can do things like posting items to your alts, it can do things like warehousing and things like that, but when it comes to flipping, because it's inherently such a simple activity, all you're going to want to do is set up buying and auctioning. So in TSM lingo, that is shopping and auctioning operations. Now, these operations are where people vary on what they would like to use as their settings for their items, and I'm no different to that. I will show you the settings I use on here, and they are incredibly simple. Basically, all I'm doing for my purchasing is I'm only going to purchase items that are at 70% of market value or lower, and I'm never going to want to purchase more than 2 of the same item. On the auctioning side, when it comes to these items, because I'm selling relatively high value items for this particular group, so it's the example I said about twink weapons, I am setting my limit of posts to be 2 for any given item, because that's how many I wish to have on my person. I am setting the auction duration to 2 hours, so that I don't have to worry about constantly recancelling when WoW Classic has incredibly high auction house posting fees. And then I'm setting minimum, normal and market and high values for my items. Now, this is the part that people often want to simply copy from other people, and it's not something I'd recommend. I'd highly recommend thinking about what you want these values to be for yourself. Now, I'm showing up on screen what mine were for this. It's 92% of market value is my minimum price for posting. I have 100% market value for my maximum price, and I think 120% for my maximum. Now, when it comes to these prices, that is essentially just because I want to be able to get sales, and I don't want to constantly be relisting items, so my selling prices are, well, fair. I'm selling at market value, which is what the item is deemed to be worth. However, I'm only buying them when it's cheap. Now, with this setup that I've shown you here, that is going to result in a lower yield of items purchased, and then a high rate of selling those items by comparison to other sellers. That's the way that I like to keep it for these twink items, but of course you can vary these as you wish. All I'm showing you here is how to create these operations and then how to use them on your group. The last thing that you are going to need to be able to do is, once you have created your operations and then you have created your group, you are going to want to associate the two. Now, how this works is simply on the groups page of TSM, click onto the group in question, click on operations on the two tabs in the right window, then override your parent operation, and then the drop down menu simply select the operation that you have created for that group. Now from there, all you're going to want to do then is simply go to the auction house, go onto the shopping tab, highlight the group that you have created and click run search, and you will then be fed back the information of all of the items that you currently have in that group on the auction house currently to see if there's anything in your price brackets. All you're going to want to do then is simply have a look at the items, find the ones that are a price value that is interesting to you, purchase them, and then relist them when appropriate. To relist them, all you're going to want to do is go collect the item from the mailbox, head back to the auction house, go onto the auctioning tab, make sure you have that same group highlighted, and click your run post scan. It is as simple as that. But that's going to about wrap it up for this video, guys. I hope you do enjoy this video. If you did, then please do consider liking the video and or subscribing to the channel. If you have any questions whatsoever, if there's anything that I've missed or you feel I haven't explained clearly, do leave a comment down below and I will do my utmost to get back to you as quickly as I possibly can and hopefully resolve the issue for you. But for now, guys, that's going to about do it. Like I said, I do hope you enjoyed and I hope to see you in the next one. Later.